Recorded Books and RB Digital present Dealing Death and Drugs, The Big Business of Dope in the U.S. and Mexico by Beto O'Rourke and Susie Bird. Narrated by Jonathan Todd Ross and Andrea Gallo. Introduction. 2008 was different. El Paso sits on the Rio Grande, aka the U.S.-Mexico border, across from Ciudad Juarez. I was born here. My co-author Susie Bird moved to El Paso with her family when she was 7. Each of us grew up a few minutes from the river and Ciudad Juarez. This experience is the lens through which we write this book. This is where Latin America and North America meet to form the largest binational community in the world. It's the point at which the 400-year-old Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, after having passed through Mexico City, Durango, Chihuahua, and Juarez, crosses into present-day U.S. territory, continuing north through El Paso and on to Santa Fe, New Mexico. This book is about what happens in our community when the value of the drugs that move through this ancient trade corridor exceeds the value of human life. We will explore the economy of the illegal drug trade, with a focus on that drug the cartels find most important to their bottom line: marijuana. With first-person accounts, court transcripts, and federal data, we will demonstrate how this simple weed has become the center of a multi-billion-dollar industry. This industry is powerful enough to threaten governments, command horrifying violence, and inspire the creation of outsized laws and budgets in the U.S., laws which end up strengthening the very cartels they were created to put out of business. We conclude by reviewing a previous experiment with prohibition and offer a solution that can undermine the power of the cartels and produce positive outcomes for both the U.S. and Mexico. At first drive-through, El Paso can feel like a richer, if more staid, suburb of Juarez, and Juarez can feel like a more exciting, if poorer, suburb of El Paso. El Paso has the tall downtown bank buildings, the ordered system of freeways and streets, the manicured lawns in distinct subdivisions. Juarez has the street life, the staggering swings between rich and poor, and the invigorating chaos of 350 years of ad hoc construction and twisting streets named for ghosts of the Revolution. Bob Dylan sings about Juarez. El Paso gets Marty Robbins. But the cities have each other. El Paso is over 500 miles from the Texas state capital and light years from Washington, D.C. Juarez is the same distance, for all practical purposes, from Mexico's centers of power and population. So far away from the interest and focus of the state or feds, isolated from other major cities by hundreds of miles of barren desert plateau, the conjoined communities have long relied on each other in the development of their commerce, families, and culture. The vast majority of El Paso is of Mexican descent. If charted, the family trees of most would show ancestors from Juarez and other smaller cities at the frontier state of Chihuahua. Cross-border family reunions are a common daily affair taking place in both Juarez and, especially these days, El Paso. There is a distinct Spanish spoken in El Paso, pocho, inflected with code-switched local phrases that I heard and spoke as I grew up. I only learned later in El Paso High Spanish class that I te huacho is not the proper way to take leave of one's friend. While not a perfect melting pot, El Paso has long been a remarkably tolerant community. Many of my friends in grade school were first- or second-generation U.S. citizens whose families crossed over from Mexico. Others were Mexican citizens and claimed residency at the home of El Paso relatives or family friends in order to attend school here. The distinction between Anglo and Mexican American stood out, as do all distinctions at that age, but it was a distinction that lacked enough difference or meaning to determine who would or would not become a friend. All of us spent time in Juarez. When we were young, we'd go to the markets and restaurants with our parents. As we got older, it was the nightclubs and bars. And when we were adults, it was back to the restaurants and markets with our own kids. Juarez was a destination for pleasure and fun, a place to take visitors to gawk and be entertained and then go home. You drank beer for 50 cents a bottle, bought some trinkets at the market, and maybe walked by the old cathedral. Having to pay your way out of a real or imagined traffic violation was about the worst that could happen. Growing up, I would hear about drug busts on the news, but it was such a common occurrence that it tended to blend into the background, like the weatherman forecasting sunshine. While there is a rich history of black market trafficking in Juarez, going back at least to the U.S. alcohol prohibition of the 1920s, as a child, I didn't understand or make the connection between the city next door and the news about drugs. If I ever did, it was only with the most passing of interests. The news reports of cocaine or marijuana seizures were at times followed by one of a number of anti-drug commercials whose taglines I can still remember. For example, "This is your brain on drugs," or "I learned it from watching you, Dad." In hindsight, their ineffectiveness is obvious. But at the time, it was not something I paid much attention to since I didn't use drugs and I wasn't interested in the subject. This was not the case for all of my friends, though. Some friends tried drugs, or at least had enough working knowledge of drugs, to convince the rest of us that they knew what they were talking about. I remember a 7th grade classmate at Mesita Elementary who not only bragged about getting high, but was caught selling dope to a janitor. He was the exception. Most kids I knew didn't try pot until later, when it was offered to them at high school parties or while drinking in the functionally all-ages bars of Ciudad Juarez. As I grew older and listened to the news a little more carefully, I learned that Juarez was the crossing point for many of the drugs, and certainly all of the dope sold and used in El Paso. Every so often, there would be news of another big bust. Tons of marijuana interdicted at the border coming over from Juarez, or bundles of cash and...
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.